All right, so let's just give this a go here on Monday? I've lost track of things. I've worked all weekend covering A's baseball, and then I wake up this morning, probably just like you did, to find out that Erik Karlsson had agreed to sign an 8-year, $92 million contract extension with the Sharks, and big day for the team. They've never offered up a contract of this duration, of this financial amount. So a huge commitment, and I know a huge conversation among Sharks fans because this lines you up for many years of the future to have a star-caliber defenseman and a player that a lot of people liked, even though they didn't really see the full Erik Karlsson last season, only played 53 games of the regular season, 19 more in the playoffs. I mean, there's a level of expectation based on what he did and who he is in his career. And also the amazing thing about how and when and where he signed this. I want to go back. I actually want to start this video by going back to when the Sharks got him, the thoughts then, thoughts as the season progressed. And let's go back to September 13th, 2018, right? I'll always remember that date. I'll never forget it because I was covering training camp media day, and all the players had taken their photographic headshots and done all the one-liner things that they'll say for the camera. And there was just a buzz about this season kind of kicking off the next day, right? Training camp starting at Solar for America Ice. Next thing you know, there's kind of a quiet lull around the place. And you see some people whispering and you're checking your phones. And there had been talks that Erik Karlsson was going to be dealt. And at some point, it narrowed down to a team in the Pacific Division, potentially. I think those tweets and information were out there. And you're thinking, well, is that the Sharks? Is that the LA Kings? I mean, there were a couple other options of just interested teams. Who wouldn't have been interested? Turns out, after we do a handful of interviews, including one with Chris Tierney, we find out mid-media day that Erik Karlsson is coming to the Sharks. So everybody scraps their plans, trying to get a hold of players for reaction, trying to get a hold of Karlsson himself for reaction. Doug Wilson was in Ottawa to go get Karlsson. And I think just looking back, you looked at that trade that San Jose made with the Senators, a couple NHL-ready players, right, in DeMello and Chris Tierney, a couple prospects, as well as a couple future draft picks. And it was a heavy, heavy deal for the Sharks to make to get, and I say only one player back in return. I'm just saying they gave up a lot to get this one player, Karlsson, in return. So there seemed to be a pressure to re-sign Karlsson. And I think I remember even saying this. It's a good deal for San Jose to get him for last season, but it turns into a great deal if they can re-sign him. Well, here they are, having just re-signed him to the maximum 8-year duration that they possibly could have. So I think if you go back in reverse, let's remember that was the mentality for a couple months. Erik Karlsson struggled at the beginning of last season. I think through his first 20 games, something like 10 points. It took him 20-something games to get his first goal, and he only had a couple, 2 or 3 goals all season long for the Sharks. But that's not it, because that's not the complete picture of his season. He goes on an absolute tear, starting at the end of November into December, all the way through January, and that is when he got hurt a couple games before the All-Star weekend, and nobody knew exactly what the ailment was publicly. And I think a lot of us were surprised to see him out there for the All-Star game, or not surprised, but at least thought that he was doing better in his injury and that he would definitely be playing games out of the All-Star break because he was better and well enough to participate. But that wasn't the case. Missed even more games, tried to come back, got hurt again, and then was basically shut down for the last month plus of the regular season, just trying to get healthy to play the 19 playoff games that he did, and he looked great in them, don't get me wrong. So I go back to just Karlsson's season in quarters. There was the acclimation period, new team, struggling to contribute on the ice. I mean, definitely fitting in with the guys, and there was no talk of anything, negative or anything like that. It just wasn't clicking on the ice. Second quarter of the season, really well. Third quarter of the season, mostly injured and out. And then the final quarter of the season, what can you say about a guy who was, operating on basically one side of his body, one side of his lower body, and one groin that needed surgical repair just, a week or so after the season ended. it goes to show you what he was fighting through in the playoffs and, what he was fighting against. He was by no means healthy enough to play, but I talked to him today, and he just reiterated, that's my DNA. That's who I am as a player in two instances. In participating in the All-Star game, because it was in San Jose, he flat out said if it were somewhere else, he wouldn't be playing. I talked about that on a prior YouTube video here. I thought that was very obvious. He did it for San Jose. And then as far as the playoffs go, he knows a lot of his teammates were hurt, but he just felt the obligation, and he said that he wouldn't have put himself out there if he thought he was going to make the team worse. He wanted to get out there and help his team, and he did everything he could to prepare for it. And yeah, you know what? He missed the last game of the playoffs. It was pretty much out of hand, that series, by that point. And the Sharks were minus a couple key players. So for him to play 19 of 20 in the playoffs, and I think 16 points in 19 games, it was a pretty tremendous showing. I'm also thinking about this, how quickly Karlsson signed after the end of this season. Now, this goes two ways, because it was February at the trade deadline when he was qualified to sign the 8-year deal. And you would have to think now, looking at this in reverse, 8 years was an important number to him. It's the max you can sign. Before the trade deadline, he could have agreed to 7 with the Sharks. He didn't. So 8 seems to me like there was an important aspect of that. But in a couple days, June 23rd, right? So 6 days from now, less than a week, he would have been able to explore the entire free agent market, talk to other teams, see where they stand. He didn't even get to the point of exploring that. And what I think about it is it's a statement about what he observed in San Jose, the kind of deal the Sharks offered him. And I think the biggest thing in talking to Doug Wilson today and Karlsson himself today that you noticed was neither side really pressured each other to make this decision. They both knew all season that it was on the table, right? And like we're saying here, there was all this time, all season, Karlsson could have got a 7-year deal. He didn't. Then after February, all that time, February, March, into April before the playoffs, and he was hurt, but could have signed the 8-year deal then. Didn't. So to do it before other teams got involved, and most importantly, to do it before July 1st, right? Doug Wilson told us today that it was a major factor of importance that Erik Karlsson, if he could, would let the Sharks know what his decision was going to be prior to July 1st, when free agency really opens up, when other teams can go ahead and sign unrestricted free agents, which Karlsson was set to be. So it just kind of shows you that the timing was special to get this done for Karlsson and him staying. So many things, again, just running through my mind about this, and I'm just going to refer to some of the notes that I had here. Yeah, they never pushed him to make a decision. Karlsson called this situation handled extremely well and professional on their part. So that's the thing about the Sharks. They are really a destination team. And I want to narrow in on something Karlsson said about what sold him on staying with the Sharks. And I think it's the Bay Area. I think it's the culture here. I think it's, it's a quality place to live. It's an expensive place to live, don't get me wrong, but it's a place that he would like to spend his winters and a majority of time during his year. He's always said Ottawa, by the way, is his forever home. And I think he's actually back there right now. So, it's a place where he's going to spend a lot of time and play his career. But part of it, to me, was observing the Sharks, the franchise, how it operates, how the players are almost Doug Wilson's best ambassadors, right? So you come in here, you're Karlsson. You look at how Joe Thornton has life. You look at what Logan Couture's doing over here, how Brent Burns is doing, and these guys, nobody's haggling them, nobody's on their case, and by that I mean the front office they let them play hockey. And don't get me wrong, there's a huge expectation on these guys. When I say nobody's on their case, it's not like there's a lack of pressure to win. It is tremendous around the Sharks. You know that. You know what they're aiming for. You know the frustrations of watching other teams get these Stanley Cups that they were built to also compete for. But the point being is just they like the atmosphere. They like the teammates. They like the coaching situation. They like everything about the Sharks. And I really think what Karlsson said subtly, but he also said straight up, was going through this postseason with the Sharks was a selling factor for him. And seeing how this team was at its most adverse moments, like, being down 3-1 in a series, like being down 3-0 in a game 7 of round 1 and jumping on a 5-minute power play. So credit the Sharks as an organization, from the front office to the players on the team to just everybody surrounding the Sharks community. Credit, and yourself as fans, credit everybody for making a good impression on Erik Karlsson. Because again, if you're thinking that he didn't have suitors, and that's the next thing I want to move on to, think about what free agency would have been like for him. I said all along that I was 50-50 on whether he'd come back or not. And the 50%, and I saw, by the way, Logan Couture had a comment to Kevin Kerr saying he thought, even as recently as the other day when he went to a Warriors game with Erik Karlsson, that he was 50-50 on it. And my point in that was, there were enough things during this past season which would make you think and realize, okay, this would be a good opportunity for him to come back. And it looks like, right, like he will. There's the other half of it, and just knowing that, he's in his prime of the NHL career. And yeah, he's coming off a serious injury, but the amount of people interested in him would be tremendous, right? He would get offers. Now, would all of them be legitimate or even compelling? Maybe, maybe not. I think if you're a guy that wants to win and also wants to command a pretty respectable coin, that limits you to only a handful of teams that could make offers you'd really consider. But he didn't even get to that point. So again, the thing I'm really focusing in on here is just that he found a good situation. He found all aspects of it to be rewarding enough to re-sign. And again, I feel like it was the situation that he really enjoyed. He enjoyed the year here. He said he felt like a Shark from start to finish. And actually, another thing he said is, as soon as he got to San Jose, he kind of put it in his mind that he was only gonna think about re-signing there. If something else brought him a different direction, okay, he'd consider it. But just goes to show you, the team did their part. Quote, "I felt like a Shark all year." I know there's a lot of questions out there, and I'll get into this. What does it mean for the rest of the team? Signing more players. What does this mean for Joe Thornton, Joe Pavelski, Timo Meier, and others? I don't want to exclude anybody, but I know those are the three that I get the most commented on. So, I could go down the list here and try and, put together a salary board and try and figure out who takes what and how this works. I'm not going to do that. I will address these three players, though. Let's start with Timo Meier, a homegrown player, up-and-coming player, has a unique style that has definitely showcased itself in the last season, the power forward. Just a great player when he was with Logan Couture, and not just because he was with 39, but 28 and 39 together, they definitely complement each other. Going from 20-something goals last year to hitting the 30 mark in this most recent season, or I should say 2 years ago to this past season. So he's continuing to take strides forward, a very physical player. I don't see, and he's an RFA, right? Is somebody else going to throw an offer sheet out there at him? Are they going to make a really legitimate high-value deal to him? Maybe. And I don't want the Sharks to not match it, but I mean, and I'm not at all saying that I hope this is. I'm looking at a worst case scenario from a Shark standpoint. Optimally, the Sharks offer him a nice raise, and I think he was in the 1.6, something like that. I should have pulled up my notes. I didn't. But is he in line for more than the contract he was on last season? Absolutely. I think those dollars are there. And I think the Sharks have put far too much into Timo to not get out some of the best from him. So I think that one's got to happen for me. And I think the situation, like I said, RFA versus flat-out UFA is completely different. Let's get to Pavelski, current captain. And you look at the salary structure, and what's interesting here is that you have a couple different tiers of players now, because you have Burns and Couture at a certain level. I'm talking about salary. Beyond that, you have Evander Kane and Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and then beyond that, you have a guy like Martin Jones. But Erik Karlsson is making a couple million more per year than even the highest paid Sharks going into today. So, where does Joe Pavelski fit on the compensation spectrum? I don't know. Is he going to get forced to taking less or forced to being offered less? Quite possibly. Or is that just going to be put in his direction? Look, I get uncomfortable talking about all this stuff because it's so hypothetical and only a handful of people actually know what's really happening and what's really going to happen. I'm just going to read to you gut human instincts here. I know Joe Pavelski loves it here, loves his teammates. He's the captain. It would be a hard split if he were not around next season or beyond, and especially the bounce back year he had, getting close to 40 goals. Yeah, he's aging, but I think his game reflects a player whose contributions aren't going to change because he's getting older. This is not a guy who relies on speed only. It's a guy who relies on hockey IQ, smarts, and sense, and a presence right in front of the opponent's crease. So, you're going to make the investment in Joe Pavelski. It's a smart one because, again, his game is not going to fade with age, especially in the next couple of years for the upcoming contract we'd be talking about. So, getting back to the point, I feel like as much as there's confidence that Timo Meier's coming back, I just also have this gut instinct that Joe Pavelski will be back as well. They'll find a way to make this work. Whether it's creativity, whether it's the full no move clauses, whatever it is, I feel like there's some creativity between a party like Doug and a party like Pavelski and agents and all that stuff in between that can get this done. I really do. And that brings me to last but definitely not least, Joe Thornton. And the one thing Doug said today in talking to him is that he wasn't going to comment on other players' negotiations. And by the way, Doug said he has been working with all of the said RFAs and UFAs from the Sharks last season, because this is the time when you get to do that before June 23rd, when every other team has a crack at it. But so just to let you know, there have been conversations with all parties from Doug Wilson. But the one guy he flat out singled out and just said, we'll welcome him back if he wants to, if it's his decision. And that's Joe Thornton. And the way I interpret this is there's no way Jumbo's not coming back. He just kind of wants to take this look at it, kind of feel the process out, because maybe this time next year he is deciding that he's done or that there's one more year after that. And so he's trying to evaluate this. I'm also curious. I've said this before. What does a season look like next year where Joe Thornton gets paced a little more? They already found the new position for him as third-line center. Does it even make sense? Give him strategic nights off. His minutes are down a couple as well on average in the last year to prior ones. But so they're finding ways to keep him super effective, right? And this is not to diminish Joe's contributions. Like, looked pretty good last season in this new role and healthy. Like, all is great for Joe Thornton. Yeah, he's fighting age. He's fighting the latest years of his career. But again, I just feel like there's no question to me Joe is coming back. Pure speculation, but no question to me that he'll be back. And that's the one player that Doug just flat out says, I'm not talking about him. I'm not talking about him. But I will tell you, he's like, and let me just read the exact quote here. I think it was, there will always be a place for Joe Thornton in this organization on or off the ice. All Joe has to do is come back and say, I want to play, and they'll figure his deal out, right? And I think Joe has been rewarded pretty well over the years. I think his role and compensation will be balanced with each other. I think at this point, Joe just wants to play hockey as many more years as he can and get as many more cracks as he can at the Stanley Cup. So, again, there's so much going on here with Erik Karlsson and this re-signing, and potentially one of the franchise-altering decisions that Doug Wilson has made. And I just want to point this out too. He wouldn't really comment on it because it is so complimentary to say, but I think it's an honest I think it's an honest evaluation of Doug Wilson. You know how players get on hot streaks, 3 goals in 5 games or point streaks or whatever. I mean, could you argue right now that Doug Wilson is on a respective hot streak in trading for Evander Kane, then re-signing him and keeping a Brent Burns and a Marc-Edouard Vlasic and a Martin Jones and a Logan Couture and keeping Joe Thornton happy for all these years and even keeping Patrick Marleau as long as he did. It's a super competitive environment, as you're all aware, from NHL GMs to each other. And it's not to say, and I know you're sitting there saying, well, yeah, Brody, but they didn't win the cup all these years. And how could you say that he's been on a hot streak? It's not successful. That's not exactly the case, in a sense that he can only do so much in laying this out on paper. He's the guy that handles it on paper. The players are the guys that go out and handle it on the ice. So he can only do so much before handing it off. And again, I'm just saying, I feel like, he's done at least his share of being on this hot streak of acquiring certain guys and re-signing ones, and the culture that has been created in San Jose. Again, you have to understand that's maybe the biggest takeaway of Karlsson re-signing. And maybe that's how I should end it. I'll also take a look at some questions and comments. And you know what? There is a bit of a delay here. So starting right now, I have not paid attention to the comments section. You guys know that. I apologize. It's only because I'm trying to be present in the video and not be so segmented. I will take questions here at the end. So go ahead with that. But the biggest takeaways of all this stuff, the culture that's been created in San Jose, the destination that it has become for, free agents, guys that were set to become a free agent, a player that liked it so much, it's tremendous. How many teams across the league can you say, well, here's a guy that committed to stay for this long, and he's not the first. The other part is the salary cap situation. Yeah, you're going to see the cap go up a couple different times here, expected in several years. So if it stresses you out right now, don't let it, because $11 million, I remember when, an $8 million deal in the NHL was like unheard of. How are you ever going to keep guys or multiple players at $8 million a year? A couple years from now, 11's going to be the new 8. Did I say that right? 8's going to be the new 11? Well, whatever. No, 11's going to be the new 8. It's not going to matter as much anymore in the future. How I think the Sharks do it, and I really think they're going to rely on younger players. They're going to have the established group of veterans, centermen especially, and defensemen, the Coutures and hopefully the Pavelskis, and obviously the blue line is pretty stacked. But they're going to rely on the foundational type players, and then they're going to, hopefully keep their pipeline strong. And it has been in recent years. I know the lack of draft picks coming up are going to be an issue, but maybe there's some movement that solidifies that future for the Sharks as well too. So what I'm saying is I understand the commitment, the sticker shock for a lot of people right now, even ones who like Karlsson, that you love Karlsson, but you're a little bit intimidated by the 8 years and $92 million. It's like anything else in life. If you thought about it enough and it seemed doable, right after you make the purchase, there's going to be a moment of, whoa, that was big. And it is big. But let time settle out before you start feeling one way or the other on that. All right. Let me get to some comments here. Here's my favorite one already. Brody, quote, "I really think Brazil." I've probably been saying that a lot, haven't I? I definitely have a couple hitches in my commentary. That's definitely one of them. I know other players that need to be re-signed: Kevin Labancs, Gus Nyquist, Jonas Donskoy. I know all the names that are out there, and I realize everybody's trying to put this same team from last year back together, and you realize that's not the way it's going to be for any team in any pro sport. Yeah, you're never going to get the identical team back. And so some players may work out, some players may not work out. But I think if you're the Sharks and you identify your foundational players, then this was the move that they had to make. And going on to another main closing point here, like this domino this domino falling of Karlsson signing is huge for the Sharks because now Doug Wilson can move on to these other players. He can get Timo taken care of. He can hopefully get Joe Pavelski taken care of. And I think Joe Thornton's going to be a July 1st guy just because. I feel, and his birthday is July 2nd. Maybe they'll just make it July 2nd. And you know what? I really don't know if I want Joe Thornton to come out and say, like, if this is going to be his last season, and my gut doesn't think it is, but eventually when the time comes for his last season, I'm not sure if I want him to come out and declare it so that we know it's his farewell season, or if I want to find out at some other point. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe you guys have some comments, thoughts on that, but I don't. Oh, somebody mentioning my aviation podcast, Next Flight. I appreciate that. That's a whole separate. It's a whole separate venture. A couple more here. What's the ideal result from this for me? Well, obviously, Sharks going to win the Stanley Cup. Look, to me, let's do it individually and then collectively, because I think there's two things at hand here. For Karlsson, I just want him to go back to having the type of season you would expect from him, right? Last year, like we talked about, struggled to acclimate, kind of felt behind the curve the entire time. I just want him to have the type of season you would expect. And I also think, too, what a lot of players fall into is this rough scenario and situation where they feel the pressure to do more and perform out of their mind because they just signed a brand new huge deal. And in reality, you've been signed on your work leading up to this, not the other way around. So just give that team and give those fans more of the same. And so I hope he can have just a really good statement season. So that's what I'd say ideally for the Sharks, or for Karlsson. As for the Sharks, I mean, look, I would love them to be in round 3 again against the St. Louis Blues again. Let's start the Western Final at 0-0, but against the Blues, but just a little bit healthier, right? And I guess does that have something to do with Karlsson or not? Well, it does. I mean, Karlsson was maybe half of himself in those playoffs, and a couple other players were, same thing, limping right through it. In the end, it got really ugly. So, the optimal situation is that the Sharks can get back to where they were this year, but just in a healthy fashion. A lot of people saying, making predictions, who's coming back, who's not. I'm not going to go there. It's not the thing here on YouTube. Pete DeBoer's a great coach. Again, I think that needs to be stated as well, too. The culture of Sharks. So many and you guys team, he's the captain, one of the leaders, and I'll leave it with this. As far as everybody else, I have the true feeling. My gut would say I wouldn't be surprised to see Karlsson on the team with Thornton, Pavelski, and Timo Meier. A couple others too. I don't want to go that far. I don't want to start naming names and going down the list. But that's how I think it's all going to work out. All right, I'm signing off. Thank you so much for checking out this YouTube video. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button below, and tell your friends. All right, talk to you soon.